Futures Radio Show, sponsored by CME Group, the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. CME Group's markets help individuals and businesses around the world effectively manage risk. For access to free educational tools and resources for the active individual trader, please visit activetrader.cmegroup.com.
Every day, traders and investors dive in to tackle the ever-changing markets to find opportunity. Futures Radio Show is your number one source for answers to the questions that all market participants want to ask. Veteran futures trader Anthony Crudele sits down with the most influential leaders and top traders in the industry. Now, here's your host, Anthony Crudele.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in for this episode with Allison Lurton. Remember, new shows are posted every Monday and Thursday. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes and YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review on iTunes. Now, before I play today's interview for you, I want to give a shout out to the great sponsors of Futures Radio Show: CME Group, Trading Technologies, RJO Futures, and Top Step Trader. To learn more about these sponsors and the important things they are doing for futures traders, be sure to click on their logos on our website. Today, I spoke with Allison Lurton, Senior Vice President and General Counsel at FIA. Quick background on Allison. She worked at the CFTC as the Chief Trial Attorney in the CFTC's Enforcement Division and counsel to the CFTC Commissioner O'Malley and Chairman Lucan. She was at the law firm of Covington and Burling LLP, where she advised financial institutions, energy firms, and pension funds on the regulatory reforms implemented as a result of the Dodd Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. In today's show, Allison and I chatted about RegTech, LegalTech, where we are with Dodd Frank, the Give Up Transfer Protocol, FIA Training, and increasing gender diversity in the futures industry. Without further ado, let me take you right to the conversation with Allison. Allison, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you're Senior Vice President and General Counsel at the FIA, which is obviously a very important position at FIA, where you're covering regulations, GDPR issues, governance, all the easy stuff, Allison. So I want to start off today by talking with you about your everyday work responding to all the regulatory issues. So talk to us about that.
So my job's a really interesting one because I'm a lawyer and I get to act as the lawyer for FIA, which means I do some of their corporate work, but I get to interact with members every day, and mostly it's through our law and compliance division. So when I think about responding to regulatory developments, we really try to do two things. As an office at FIA and working through the group we assemble of lawyers in the industry, we try to identify the regulatory issues that'll affect our firms, our member firms. And with them, we then work on how can we respond. But in addition to that, we do that follow-up work of creating committees, doing drafts. We do meetings with regulators. We try to put out documentation and helpful guidance to the industry on what are really complex regulations. So sometimes we're pushing back, sometimes we're congratulating the regulator for hitting it out of the park, and then sometimes we're asking for tweaks around the edges. And that's mostly what we're doing, responding to regulatory. It's all member driven, but we see ourselves as a bit of a conduit through which they can talk to regulators, feed back to regulators, and just learn as well from regulators about what's expected.
Yeah, I've done some shows on RegTech, and I'm wondering, has the technology helped you guys out a lot?
So from where I sit, the technology doesn't quite touch us and me. And that's because as we respond to regulatory rules, I have yet to see a RegTech product that hits that one for me. Now, maybe it's out there, maybe it's in development. But for our firms, I think RegTech and LegalTech is at a really interesting spot. It's a tough industry to crack, and that's partly because lawyers can be very particular about whether they're willing to say they've advised on something, or can I tell you you can do this? So when you take that information and you try to put it into a technology solution, I think lawyers can be reticent to say, yes, this is legal advice. But I've been walking the floor here today at the Innovators Pavilion. I've seen a couple of RegTech firms. I had exposure to them in the past as well, and I really think they're starting to refine the product so that they're finding as far as they can go with a technology solution that actually helps people, whether it's reporting or identifying trades that must be cleared, or just managing what they're doing in the firm to an extent that they can then satisfy compliance needs. They're really getting better. It's harder in the legal space because I think lawyers want to be giving legal advice based on specific fact patterns. And technology solutions are a little bit more widely applicable. So it's a hard space in legal, but I've seen a lot of tremendous developments, some of them here today.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So I talk to many traders, firm owners, just a lot of market participants, and they're always complaining about something. And it seems to me like this Dodd Frank compliance is still something that a lot of people, aren't too happy with. So where are we with everything with Dodd Frank right now?
That's a great question. So, when Dodd Frank was passed, I was actually working at the CFTC, and I left not long after that to work in the private sector, helping firms respond to the rules. And now I work for the FIA, and we've come really full cycle. We've seen most of the rules out from the CFTC, and even to the point where we're at an opportunity to reflect and see, do they need some fine tuning? I think that's really where we are post Dodd Frank. The market has done a lot of adjustments to accommodate. They've actually invested in technology solutions to help them comply. They've relocated offices to help them comply. So they don't necessarily want to undo Dodd Frank because they've invested in the current compliance requirements. But there are still some things that just don't make sense. And that's not to be critical of the regulator. These are the kinds of things you don't know until you actually put them into place. And I think we've seen a little bit of a willingness from the CFTC to revisit rules. The most recent example I can think of is the rules around the chief compliance officer requirements for swap dealers and FCMs. They've changed those. They've tried to make them more manageable, more accommodating to what firms need. So I do think there's an interest there to rethink and to tweak. I'm not sure firms in general want to undo all of it because they've invested in being in the right place. But some of them, as you consider the totality of the impact, they just need to be tweaked.
Let's talk about the give up transfer protocol. I bet you a lot of people out there know what a give up is. There's probably a lot of people that don't. So talk to us about what the give up transfer protocol is and also what a give up is.
Okay, good. I like this question because one of the things we try to do at FIA is really help firms on the things that are very difficult to do just as a single firm trying to run a business. And this is a good example because FIA worked with our subsidiary organization, FIA Tech, that has a product that works directly with give-up agreements. And give-up agreements are those agreements that customers enter where they ask one FCM or executing broker to execute the trade and to give it up to a different FCM for the clearing of the trade. And those agreements have been around for a long time. The original base agreement, which is standard, was drafted by our long compliance committee at FIA. And right now, FIA Tech, our subsidiary, runs a service around it. They'll store the documents, they'll manage the documents, they help you execute electronically the documents, and then they run a business to settle brokerage among the firms. What we realized in response to particularly Brexit, but it has other applications, is that there might be a need, and it might be a quick need, to move some of those give-up agreements to other affiliates. So if you think about the impact of Brexit on firms, some of the firms are going to have to relocate business. They might have to repaper customers. And one of the things we wanted to take off their plate was to think about, what do I do with all my give-up agreements? They're currently papered with an entity that I might need to stop trading with to comply with other requirements. So what we did is we came up with a simple solution with Tech's help and with the help of an outside law firm to transfer in bulk those give-up agreements that you have in place. And the thought there is, if what you're doing is moving for business needs just to an affiliate, it should be an easy process. You shouldn't have to go through the process of executing individually each give-up agreement again. With the short deadlines facing firms for Brexit, we were able to introduce last month a protocol, which is really just a legal agreement that allows mass transfer, that'll allow firms to sign up and then indicate which agreements they want to transfer, and for all other parties involved to accept those terms. And when they do, they end up in a new agreement with the new party. And then Tech's solution creates the new document that reflects that arrangement. And it's nice because it's a technology solution addressing a market need that was brought to FIA, and it was really a partnership between FIA as a member community and the tech the tech entity, which is our subsidiary, helping to really create a solution that was custom to the need.
So Allison, last year at this event, I spoke with one of your colleagues about FIA training. I thought it was a great idea for FIA to get involved in training people in our industry about regulation and the many other important issues that FIA works on. So can you explain to everyone what FIA training is and how's it going for you guys with FIA training?
Sure, I'm happy to do it. Very simply, FIA training is e-modules you can do at your desk that help improve proficiency really in the market. And in some ways they can be used to show that you've learned, and compliance officers I think are using them as ways to complete annual training requirements, but I think others are just trying to learn and show that they've self-educated. This entire project, FIA training, was developed in response to member needs. We asked how FIA could help, and they said really they could use some help with training. So one of my former colleagues, Marianne Burns, had this idea and has brought it to fruition. We've now got 5 modules out. We just launched Safeguarding Customer Funds, and that one's really important for us, and that's because the FCM community has a requirement in Rule 1.11 to educate and train on an annual basis all kinds of folks within the FCM, not just the traders, not just the legal staff, everyone, operational, everything. And so this is a tool you could use to help meet that training requirement, specifically designed with the help of folks at NFA, with experts in the industry we work with, to talk about how customer funds are safeguarded in our industry. It's unique to our industry, and it makes for a good module. We've really learned that firms put a lot of resources into training. They have to in some respects, but a lot of them do it out of interest to distinguish a firm maybe as one that's particularly known for its compliance. They spend a lot of time picking the courses. So we found a lot of positive response from those who buy the modules. We're still working to get it in front of as many people as we'd like, because we see this as a way to standardize some of the basics of our industry. Not the custom training folks sometimes will hire that's really about a specific business model, but to standardize what the nuts and bolts are, but to use industry wisdom, that collective wisdom that FIA can bring to make it really the best module you can get at a price point that makes sense. So we're still working on it. We're always open for new topics that fit that description, and there'll be many more coming, so you should keep your eyes open.
You're fresh coming out of a panel called Shattering the Glass Ceiling, which was about increasing gender diversity in the futures industry. Can you share with us a little bit about some of the things you discussed there?
Sure. We've noticed at FIA, where we do several conferences every year, that the topic of gender diversity in futures is coming up more and more. And it's coming up organically on panels that are not necessarily about gender diversity, but people are mentioning it in all kinds of spaces in our panels. So we decided this would be the conference to try one entirely dedicated to women in futures and gender diversity. And as I prepared for it as a moderator, wasn't quite sure where to go with it. You don't want to go negative, you want to stay positive, you want to reflect that the achievement women have made over recent years and longer really in our futures industry. But there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot more dialogue to be had. So the panel was really interesting. We had a lot of very accomplished women. Many of them people would recognize. They're so accomplished just walking down the street in our industry. But we found that they all have different views. They all have different views about how they ended up successful. They have different views about how women who are just coming up in the industry can be encouraged. We found that women can be just as great at trading as men, and that's a common topic folks in our industry like to talk about. That are the behaviors of men who are really successful traders, are those ones women can emulate. And I read some really interesting articles. It turns out women who are just really authentic to what they're good at, they can be as good or better traders than men. So we talked about trading, we talked about lawyers, and we talked about clearing and risk managers in our industry, and whether any of those are particularly better for women or not, and then just changes and strides the entire industry's made to promote women. It was interesting, and the conversation was really dynamic. We had a few tough questions from the audience, and it just felt timely, and hopefully it's just the beginning of a dialogue.
I think it's great. I'm so glad you guys did this, and I could say from my personal experience, some of the best traders I know are women. Some of my best guests on the show are women. So I love that we are promoting more, increasing gender diversity in the futures industry. So last question before we get into our rapid fire, which I know you're excited about. There's no prizes given though, Allison, so don't worry about it. But no, last question is, I attend the 4 major events that FIA puts on every year: Boca, London, Chicago, Asia. Great, love them. But every spring I see this email for the FIA Law and Compliance Division, and I believe it's in DC, and I have yet to attend. So give myself and other traders out there, other market participants, a reason to look to attend this event.
That's a great question. And I'm not going to lie that it is an enormous gathering of lawyers. So that in itself can be a bit intimidating or maybe just discouraging. But it is really the premier legal event in the futures industry. It's been going on for 40 years. So it's got a history and a track record of providing really good speakers, but also just educating attendees on the latest developments in the legal and compliance space. For traders, I think they might find interesting some of the elements on RegTech and LegalTech we're trying to incorporate in. Nobody wants to be sidetracked by compliance. They want to be able to do their job, and I imagine traders are the same way. So I think the legal community is trying to focus on that too. How can they interact, provide advice, but not get in the way of someone who wants to trade? I don't think it's easy. I do think the industry is improving that. So it's the kind of event you would attend to learn what's out there. If there's acronyms or new rules you want to know more about, that's where you'd go. But we're working on making it more of a RegTech and LegalTech event as well, which I think really could attract more traders. So we'll see. It's every May. It's now in Washington. It used to be in Baltimore. And in my community, they called it the Baltimore Conference, and they always celebrated that it was in Baltimore. It grew so much, Baltimore could no longer host us. So I think that's a testament to how successful that conference is. So it is now in Washington. It's every spring. It's 3 days. And it is really the latest and greatest lawyers, both inside FCMs, inside the asset management community, and also all the external legal service providers. And in addition to those lawyers, it's the compliance officers, those who are really interacting every day maybe with the desk, helping them process whether things can be done or not and how. So it's exposure to all those issues.
Yeah, I always go back to my personal reasons for possibly wanting to attend is I've been a trader my entire life, and I only focused on charts and fundamentals. That was it. But now that I'm doing the radio show, I'm learning so much more about the industry, about the business that I've been in since I was 18 years old. So it is interesting to me, and I do think it's important for traders out there to go beyond the charts, understand your industry, and also I think it matters in who you're voting for politically. I've seen this, and there's certain things that are coming out that you need to know that are regulations on our industry that could impact us. So knowing that and learning what I've learned about the industry now, it's you might see me there in DC next year.
That would be great.
Yeah. So great stuff, Allison. I have some rapid fire questions if you're ready for those.
I'm ready.
All right, everyone. Our rapid fire segment is sponsored by Trading Technologies. Access the global markets from virtually anywhere with TT. They are the world's fastest commercially available futures trading platform. And now you can trade cryptocurrency spot and derivative markets side by side. For more information, please visit tradingtechnologies.com. Allison, first question for you. Who has influenced your life the most and why?
For many years, I would have said it was my dad, and that's because he's a lawyer and I'm a lawyer, so you see the obvious connection. I think in preparing for this morning's gender diversity panel, I'm going to have to add my mom to that list. She built her own business multiple times over, and she worked really hard and still does. And I think I was thinking about some of the women that were success. I got to say, my mom's also a role model. She's not a lawyer, but she shows me how to she's probably a trader at heart, to be honest with you, Anthony, because she can be cutthroat when she needs to be, and she's always outcome driven. It's like she'll do anything to get it done. So between the two of them, I'm going to now have to say for the first time on your show, it's both my mom and my dad.
I love it. What was one of the hardest things that you've had to overcome working in the financial industry?
So I didn't start in the financial industry. I started as a lawyer that did litigation. I did tobacco litigation, and then I worked for the Justice Department, and it had nothing to do with this stuff. So when I came to the CFTC, which was really my first introduction to the markets, I had to overcome not knowing everything about these markets. I think these markets can be intimidating. I think that this is a complex industry. These aren't necessarily retail markets, the ones we work in. So you may not have an independent understanding of the markets. You might only have learned on the job, particularly for lawyers and women. you got to kind of trust yourself. You can learn that stuff along the way. You bring your skill set and you learn the financial markets. I've learned a ton about markets and I feel more confident about it. But nobody should be afraid to go in as a newcomer and not know. You can learn quite a bit from people who have been around here. It shouldn't be intimidating. It should just be, I mean, it is a complex market, but anyone who's interested can learn.
How has your process evolved over the years?
That's a good question. I could think of so many different ways to answer it, but I think the best thing, as I've kind of matured just as a professional, and that's as a lawyer, but also in financial services and learning about traders, is it's an ecosystem. So I can come in with some rules and laws, but it doesn't mean anything if I don't understand how it's going to impact the person I'm talking to. So when I was in private practice, I did a lot of work advising compliance officers who were trying to design programs for traders, or lawyers who have to advise traders on specific transactions. You can't do any of that in a vacuum. I need to learn about why someone wants to trade, in what way, to be able to advise how the rules apply. And I think the same is true in my job. When I try to educate and respond to a rule, it's all about the various pieces that are impacted. And I find that I've gotten to be a better lawyer and advisor and someone who knows something about markets from the perspective of a lawyer by appreciating it's all part of an ecosystem. No individual piece stands on its own. And that can be hard because I got a lot to read. So for me to read all these rules, I mean, the government can publish quite a lot of rules.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, step outside of myself and figure out why would it matter to someone I'm talking to. That's really what's made me better, is when I'm willing to do that and think about the other people I work with.
I know you're not a trader, but you know traders because you work with so many of them. What is one attribute that you believe every trader should have?
Ooh, that's good. Well, it's absolutely and most definitely self-awareness and confidence. And I think in preparing for this morning's panel on gender diversity, I read a lot of materials on traders, and that's because women are not known to be a dominant gender in trading, and it's sort of curious to me why. And what I read was the women who really did succeed at trading, they are really good at it. And one of the ways they did it is not to act like a man in trading, but to just be super authentic as to what they were good at. So having not actually traded, it's hard for me to articulate, but what I took it to mean was, if you know you're good at something and you've got an instinct about the trading, or you think you've got the facts you need to then make a trading decision, you gotta have supreme confidence in it, and then you gotta execute on it. It doesn't matter your gender, but you need to really be confident about it. If you're gonna waffle at all, that's where you're gonna find issues. I think we have a lot of big egos probably in trading. That's maybe what I've seen from my exposure. I don't know them all, but I think that there's a reason for that. You gotta have some confidence to be good at this.
There's just a few egos out there, but you know, and all joking aside, you have to have an edge about you. That to me is what I always felt about traders. You know, coming from the floor, each trader had their own personality. It was their own business. We had some fundamental similarities in the way we approached our business, but no two traders are the same. There's no two traders the same, and you do have to have a little edge about you. That was a great answer. I loved it. What's the favorite book that you've read lately?
I don't have time to read books.
You're reading too many other things.
I'm trying to read Alexander Hamilton after seeing the show, but it's a long book, so I'll let you know at next year's expo whether I've finished the book.
What's your favorite movie about trading?
It's definitely Trading Places, and I can't believe you ever get a different answer. But when I got into the CFTC, you know, I mentioned I was a lawyer, so I didn't necessarily even know the Commodity Exchange Act. I remember queuing up that movie thinking maybe I could learn something. But I love that movie, and it's timeless.
What's the best piece of advice that you've received about financial markets?
Well, I think I've already touched on this idea that the markets are interdependent. The pieces that make a market move are interdependent. Where I work at the FIA, we focus on FCMs, but they don't exist in a vacuum. They need clearinghouses, they need clients, they need bankruptcy protective laws, that the function is entirely interdependent. And I think that I've learned quite a bit about markets in that way. I never knew that before I learned the laws about the markets and watched people trade. I think it's really important that regulators remember that, and we do a lot of that at FIA. We talk about you can never get too comfortable. This is about managing risk, and risk can be anywhere. And if you ever feel like you can sit back and rest, that's when you're going to be watching the next crisis. So, as a lawyer, I'm always a little bit worried. Having been a regulator, I know they worry. And just understanding how things are so interdependent, it reminds you, you've got to always be vigilant and watch risk and make sure it's managed. Are the rules right? Is there anything that could go astray? Because as an interdependent market, potentially the whole thing collapses if you've got a real problem.
If you could go back in time and give the younger you a piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it's definitely, I was, again, back to this gender diversity panel. I hope you don't mind, but I literally walked straight here. So I did a lot of reading on that. And what I found was people saying, don't give up on your dream. Like there was this place you want to be at the end of your career. And I never did that. And I wondered if I was deficient because I didn't know what I definitely wanted to do in 20 years. And what I now know when I look back, each little step I took, each job I took, it led to the next one. And as long as I was doing something I thought made sense at that time, I ended up where I really, really like to be. I really do love my job. I think it suits me really well because I get to do public speaking, but I also get to do the law, and that's what I like. But when I was a junior lawyer doing tobacco litigation, I never would have told you I would be sitting here talking to you on Futures Radio. I didn't know what a Futures was, apart from that Trading Places movie. So I think the advice is, you do not need to be focused on where you plan to retire from. It's about a lot of little steps that they have to make sense at the time. And when I look back, I'm lucky to have done some of that.
Last question for today. Favorite thing to do when you are not working?
Well, this is going to sound really sad, but I have an 11-year-old. That's not the sad part. But when I'm not working, I try to convince him how great the futures markets are because I didn't know anything about it. And like, if you don't know someone that does it, I didn't grow up in Chicago, so there's not that tradition. I made him watch Trading Places, and then I try to explain to him until I can see his eyes glass over about futures. So maybe one day I'm breeding a little futures trader. I don't know. It's basically spending time with my son.
I love it. Where can people find FIA on Twitter, and give us a website, please?
So the Twitter handle is FIA Connect, and there's tons of information at FIA.org, which is our website.
Allison, this was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on Futures Radio Show today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to have spoken with you. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Futures Radio Show. If you have any questions or comments for myself or my guests, please visit futuresradioshow.com and sign up to be a premium member for free. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes.